Right now, the pattern we've been tracking all week just got a whole lot worse. And I need to walk you through exactly why, because this is shaping up to be one of those stretches where the atmosphere just refuses to let go. We're looking at compounding flood threats, a heat dome that's expanding instead of breaking down, and a fire weather setup out west that's about to get nasty too. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. The biggest change from what we were watching yesterday is that the flood threat has sharpened up and it has gotten more dangerous, not less. The atmosphere is going to keep rebuilding storms over the exact same ground for a second, maybe even a third day in a row. And that is the recipe for the kind of flooding that catches people off guard, because it's not one storm, it's storm after storm after storm rolling over the same creeks, the same low-lying roads, the same neighborhoods that already can't take another drop. I've been saying all week that this setup had the potential to get worse, and unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening. Here's the deal. We've got a deep tap of moisture getting pulled up from the Gulf, and it's slamming into a stalled boundary that just will not move. Normally, you get a batch of storms, they fire, they dump their rain, and then steering winds shove them on down the road so somebody else gets the next round. That is not what's happening here. The winds aloft are set up in almost a straight line right along that boundary, which means every new storm that fires is going to ride along the exact same track as the one before it, back building again and again like train cars rolling down the same section of rail. And when that happens, for 2 or 3 days straight, you're not just talking about a few inches of rain, you're talking about totals that can climb well past half a foot, maybe even approaching a foot in the most persistent corridors. The precipitable water values in this air mass are running at or above what we typically see, which basically means the atmosphere is loaded up like a sponge that's already soaked and ready to wring out. And when you combine that kind of moisture with a boundary that refuses to budge, you get exactly the kind of flash flood setup that emergency managers dread, because it doesn't matter how much warning you give. People, if the water is rising 3, 4, 5 inches an hour in the middle of the night while everybody's asleep. What's making this round scarier than what we were tracking before is the ground itself. Soils in the corridor we're watching are already saturated from the earlier rounds, so there's almost nowhere for this new rain to go. Creeks that were already running high are going to jump their banks faster this time. Rivers that were already elevated are going to crest higher and stay in flood stage longer. Basements that took on water once this week could take on water again. And honestly, some of these spots could see worse flooding the second time around than they did the first, simply because there's no capacity left in the ground to soak anything up. Right now, we're sitting at an elevated risk for excessive rainfall, and I would not be shocked at all if that risk gets bumped up another notch in the next update, because the models have been trending more aggressive with rainfall totals every single run, not less. When you see that kind of consistent trend, run after run after run, pushing the numbers higher, that tells you the confidence is building on a genuinely dangerous outcome, not a fluke. So if you live anywhere in that corridor and you know if you're in it because you've probably already seen some flooding this week, please have a plan for tonight and tomorrow. Know how you'd get out if water started rising around your house. Don't drive around barricades. Don't try to cross a flooded roadway in the dark thinking you know how deep it is, because you don't. And that is how people lose their lives in these events every single year. Turn around. Don't drown, y'all. I know you've heard it 1,000 times, but it saves lives every single time somebody actually listens. Before we keep going, let's talk about today's sponsor, because staying connected during a stretch like this genuinely matters. If cell service or your carrier situation has ever left you frustrated during severe weather coverage, you know exactly why I care about this. A reliable connection means you get the warning the second it's issued, not 5 minutes late because you were stuck in a dead zone. Whatever provider you use, make sure your phone is charged, make sure your alerts are turned on, and make sure you've got a backup way to get warnings if the power goes out, whether that's a battery-powered radio or a fully charged power bank. It sounds simple, but in the middle of an overnight flash flood, that simple prep is what gets you the 10 extra minutes you need to get to higher ground. Now, back into it, because the flooding isn't the only thing that got worse. This heat dome that's been building across the central part of the country isn't just holding steady, it's expanding. And it's expanding right into places that were only dealing with warm weather a few days ago. We've got the core of the ridge strengthening, and that means the afternoon highs in the hardest hit areas are going to be pushing well into the upper 90s, and in some spots flirting with triple digits, especially once you factor in the humidity riding along with it. The scarier piece of this, and I say this every single time there's a heat event because it genuinely is the most dangerous part, is the overnight lows. When highs get pushed into the upper 90s during the day, but the lows at night can't drop much below the mid-70s, that's when bodies stop getting the recovery time they need. Air conditioning access becomes a life or death issue in that scenario, not an exaggeration. A literal life or death issue, especially for elderly folks, for people with pre-existing health conditions, for outdoor workers, and for anybody without reliable access to cooling. If you know somebody in one of those situations, this is the week to check in on them. Seriously, not next week, this week. And unfortunately, this heat dome shows no real sign of breaking down anytime soon. The pattern locks in and just sits there, which means we're not talking about a 1 or 2 day spike. We're talking about a multi-day stretch where the heat compounds on itself. The ground dries out even more. The grid gets stressed from everybody running air conditioning at the same time, and the risk of heat-related illness climbs with every additional day the dome holds its position. Now let's swing out west, because that's where the split gets even more dramatic than it was earlier this week. On one side, we've still got monsoonal moisture getting pulled up into the southwest, and that's going to keep firing off slow-moving storms capable of dropping intense localized rainfall in a short window. In steep terrain and near burn scars, that kind of rain doesn't need to fall for very long before you're dealing with a legitimate flash flood and debris flow risk. If you're anywhere near a recent burn scar in that region, please take these storms seriously, even if the forecast rainfall total doesn't sound like much on paper, because burn scars turn moderate rain into major runoff almost instantly. But just to the north and west of that moisture, it's the exact opposite story. And honestly, this is the part of the forecast that worries me just as much as the flooding does. The Great Basin and parts of the interior west are bone dry. Humidity is crashing down into the single digits in some spots, and we've got gusty west to southwest winds moving through at the same time. That combination, dry fuels, low humidity, and strong wind, is exactly the recipe fire weather forecasters dread, because it only takes one spark, whether that's a downed power line, an equipment malfunction, or unfortunately sometimes something avoidable, like an unattended campfire, to turn into a fast-moving, hard-to-control wildfire. So if you're out in that region this weekend, please be extra careful with anything that could throw a spark. It's wild when you think about it, but you could genuinely have a flash flood warning in one state and a red flag fire warning one state over happening at the exact same time. That's how split this pattern has become, and it just shows you how much extra energy and moisture contrast is packed into the atmosphere right now. Now, I don't want to leave you with nothing but bad news, because there's a pocket of genuinely pleasant weather out there for some of you. Up across the northern tier, you're going to catch a real break, comfortable temperatures, lower humidity, and a mostly dry stretch that's going to feel fantastic compared to what everybody else is dealing with. If you're lucky enough to be in that stretch this weekend, get outside and enjoy it, because dry, stable weather like that doesn't come around all that often in the middle of summer, and it is absolutely not guaranteed to last. Which brings me to the part of this forecast that has me the most concerned looking further out. Because when we look toward the middle of the month, this pattern doesn't show real signs of breaking down, it shows signs of locking in even harder. The ridge responsible for this heat is forecast to hold its general position, which means we could be looking at an extended stretch of well above normal temperatures across a huge chunk of the country, with heat index values climbing into dangerous territory day after day after day. When a pattern gets stuck like this, the compounding effects get worse with every passing day. Drier ground, stronger heat domes, more strain on power grids, and less relief in the forecast. So here's where I land on all of this. This is a genuinely dangerous multi-hazard pattern, and it did get worse overnight, not better. The flood threat is more serious because the ground is more saturated. The heat threat is more serious because the dome is expanding and showing staying power. And the fire weather threat out west is more serious because that dry, windy stretch isn't going anywhere either. None of these threats exist in isolation right now. They're all stacking on top of each other across different parts of the country at the same time. And that's exactly the kind of setup that keeps meteorologists up at night, because it means there's no single safe direction to point people toward. If you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Check on your neighbors, especially anyone vulnerable to the heat. Have an evacuation plan if you're anywhere near flood-prone terrain. Never drive through flooded roads, no matter how familiar they look. And if you're out west, be mindful of anything that could spark a fire in that dry, windy air. This pattern isn't done with us yet, and I promise you I'll keep tracking every twist and turn of it as new data comes in. That's all I've got for you today. Make sure you're staying weather aware. Keep an eye on your local alerts, and I'll be back with the next update as soon as the picture becomes clearer. Stay safe out there, y'all, and I'll see you in the next one.